Hi, folks. You're with Tassa today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the strident, indeed hysterical, anti-Western, anti-white, anti-male propaganda that's being pushed through, as far as I can tell, all Western education systems. I mean, it certainly is in the United States, Britain, Canada, and of course Australia. So and New Zealand. So I'm assuming it's elsewhere across the West as well. Now, the basis for this anti-Western, anti-white is very ideological and is heavily influenced by Marxist sort of ideology and how the Marxists portray and present the methodology through which facts and well, not facts, but events should be viewed and judged. So now there are some manifestations of this, and I've mentioned this in the past. Some manifestations of this hysterical anti-Western education is how, when I talk to any high school student or someone who's recently left high school or gone to university, and this is even from middle school, so saves people, students aged from 14 or so. Now, I don't get to see sort of any of these children other than outside of the kids of people that we know. So this is hardly a poll, but not all, but most of the people we know are sending their kids to quite expensive private schools. So if anything, is an over-representation of expensive education from the 10 most expensive schools in the country. One of them, I think, is the third most expensive school in the country. So when these kids talk about their heroes and their heroes from history, and their the people they most admire in history and they most sort of look up to as being, moral guides, if you like, then it rarely falls. I have not seen a single white person, by the way, who's any of these kids have as a hero, not one. Now, well, hold on a minute. It's a white country. The teachers are white. The kids are white with white parents. So you mean there's not one white character in history that you can look up to say did anything good? Not one. I mean, you've got to be fucking kidding. They're all brown and black and all from third world countries. Or not all. They're all activists and mostly from third world countries. So the three ones that appear the most often are Nelson Mandela from South Africa, and Mahatma Gandhi from India, and Martin Luther King Jr. From the United States. So why are these people heroes? Because they're fighting back against white oppression. They're fighting back against those fucking white Nazi devils, Hitler. And it's okay. All right, well, what do they know? That they only understand the very narrow, airbrushed version of history from these characters. Karl Marx gets a good mention as well. He's Jewish, I guess, but he's white. So when I talk about, okay, well, Gandhi actually came from a very wealthy family, Indian family, and his family had business interests all across India, in South Africa. They were able to pay for him to go to England and get an education and wear sharp suits while he was doing it and this sort of stuff. So this idea that Gandhi was some peasant fighting back against the man, that's bullshit. And they don't know that. Now, they don't know that Gandhi, in fact, tried various, their full understanding of Gandhi is that movie Gandhi. It was done, which is super activism, was done by Attenborough, Richard Attenborough, in what would it have been, the 80s, I guess. That's their sole understanding of Gandhi, which was so politicized and things that never happened to Gandhi, things that Gandhi never did, views that Gandhi never held. It's a complete misrepresentation of Gandhi and presents him as this great man, and not as it was in reality. So he came from a wealthy family. Now, if you had enough money, in India to send your your offspring around the world to study at the most prestigious universities in the world and live in nice areas and that sort of thing, then you were doing pretty good. So Gandhi's hardly oppressed. His family had, again, interests in trade and so on in South Africa, and so they had an office there. Gandhi went to work there. He tried his hand at being a lawyer, but wasn't really that interested, and so he was somebody. He's one of these rich kid drifters. He didn't know what he wanted to do. His parents were, thinking he was a bit of a wastrel because all he did is wander around spending the family's money, and so he thought, well, I know what I'll do. I'll find something I can oppose. And again, he came under the influence of sort of Marxist ideology. So I know what I'll do. I'll oppose the British occupation of India. That's what I'll do, and therefore that'll give me a purpose in life and a reason for living, and so on. So he decided to pretend he was a peasant, dressed in very basic sort of cotton, the local sort of peasant dress, and go around doing starvation things like, I'm going to fast until I get this, and he lived on a diet for a while of peanut butter and lemon juice. That was that. He decided he's only going to eat that. So needless to say, his health started to suffer, and he's able to turn that into well, look what the British did to me. So the whole thing was a publicity campaign. It kind of fell in line with what the communist agitators around the world were doing at the time, and they helped it along immensely. But also after the Second World War ended, the American propaganda establishment kicked into gear along with Gandhi as well, that he was morally such a superior being, and so on. And the Americans were very keen for the British to dismantle their Commonwealth and Empire, or particularly the Empire. The reason being is during the Great Depression, the British had decided to effectively pull up the drawbridge and trade only within their Empire and Commonwealth, and so this cut out a lot of American goods from there, and meant that the British economy was one of the earlier economies to recover or undergo a partial recovery at least from the Depression, whereas the American economy sort of continued to stumble along back in the day. So this was something that the Americans were mindful of, and they figured they overestimated the size of the British international sort of economy and reach. So they were determined to dismantle it, thinking that there was a lot of goodies and gold nuggets there to be had, when really there wasn't. So the American propaganda machine swung in behind the Indians as well. So it presented them in a light that was far more favourable than reality would have suggested. Now, when the British warned about mass unrest and political and religious divides, everyone waved it away. Yeah, you're just saying that. Yeah. You damn fucking white fascists. Why don't you just fuck off? And so there's a lot of that. And this had an effect of elevating Gandhi into the level of a moral. His virtue was unending, and bright lights shone out of all sides of him. Well, when in fact it's nothing of the sort. He's just a rich kid who had nothing to do, couldn't find anything to do in life, and decided to do that. And as events way beyond his control, and certainly nothing he contributed to, conspired. He became the face of the changing nature of empire and colonialism that was very much a thing at the time, and assaulted from two sides, the communists and Marxists on one side, and again the Americans on the other, for purely different reasons, but were effectively pursuing the same goal. Now, the British were in fact hounded out of India. Really, they had already talked to agreed that there would be a program for independence, and that they weren't shy about that. But they wanted to do it over a 20-25 year period, whereas the Indians wanted it now, or pretended to. Now, the effect of this, though, was that when the British warned of, well, these will be the consequences if we leave quickly, came to pass, and millions of people on the subcontinent, what today be Pakistan and Bangladesh and India, Indians and so, Sikhs, millions upon millions of people died as a result of that. So that, in my view, that's Gandhi's achievement, his failure to understand that would be the consequences of it, and his inability to manage or agree with the parties that there is a way we can move forward here that isn't going to involve the loss of tens of millions of lives. But Gandhi threw that away, as did others. Gandhi wasn't the only one. Nehru and others were also involved in that. So why doesn't Gandhi take a big slice of that responsibility? Now, Gandhi was concerned that if it was over a longer period of time, he may die before independence was achieved, and he wanted it to be, it was a vanity project in effect. But that's not taught today. Now, to me, if I was teaching history, I would say, okay, well, here's all the issues around this. This is the truth about Gandhi. Don't see him as some great hero. So see for what he did, and that's fine. But let's strip away the propaganda and let's look at the consequences of what he was doing and what was really the situation. And he ain't no hero. Oh, that's my view. That's my view, of course. Now, coming now to Mandela. Mandela again is idolized as a near fucking god, and I don't know what the base of that is. The guy was a terrorist setting off bombs and that were killing and maiming people. So I don't know how can you shroud yourself in moral virtuous greatness on that basis. Now he was put in prison for those crimes, but he was he was told, and this was made very, very public all around the world, that all he has to do is renounce any form of violence, such as setting off bombs. All he had to do is renounce that, and he could have walked out the prison that very day. That very day, he could have walked out. That's lost now in the midst of ideological, revisionism and historical revisionism. That's all Mandela had to do, and he could have walked out the prison that very day. But for 20 years or however long he was in prison, he refused to do that, and yet he's held up as some virtuous thing. Now, Mandela was. I mean, he obviously read a lot of books. He had plenty of time for thinking while he's in prison, and Mandela did have the sense to realise that if all the capable, skilled white people were kicked out of South Africa, that South Africa would suffer. He was smart enough to know that the black people couldn't take up the slack there if all those skilled white folks left. But as soon as it became obvious that the power would be surrendered to the black people in South Africa, pretty much every skilled white person that could got out of the place real quick, and quite a few of them came to Australia. And I thought South Africans must be an exceptionally bright bunch of people, not quite appreciating back in the day that really it was the brightest, most mobile and most skilled and most energetic people who were leaving South Africa. You can't afford to lose people like, no economy can afford to lose bright, hardworking, go-ahead people. And some of these people were very impressive, in my view, the white people were very impressive, but they were all doing everything they could to get out of South Africa. But Mandela did understand that you can't lose all your skilled people and still have a vibrant economy. But and he did have the sense to see that there had to be a changeover, a period where the nation and the economy would transition from a very efficient white rule to a very differently structured crony economy that was going to be run by the black. Now, I don't think anyone realised just how corrupt and how basket case South Africa would become. Look at it today. I mean, it's gone from being a very rich, well-run, well-administered country into being a fucking basket case. The highest rates of violence and rape in the world. Is that even possible? It's gone from one of the lowest rates to one of the highest rates, and done that in 25 years. So the idea of the consequences of the black takeover there, if you will, the consequences have been diabolical and disastrous. Millions have died as a consequence of it, and yet that's sort of brushed under the carpet, and that's not taught to these kids that say Mandela was this great man. Now, Mandela's wife that was neck lacing, that's putting tyres around the necks of people that were supposed to be collaborating with the whites and setting fire to them. Why isn't that taught in schools? Why isn't that sort of there? Winnie Mandela and so on. That should be, surely that should be a part of it. Mandela's setting off bombs, that's been airbrushed out. So when I mention these things, that to the kids that say Mandela's this great man, they look at me almost in shock and disbelief. No, you must be making that up. Are you a Nazi? And so when I mention these things, they just haven't been told that. Why would they be taught such a very one-sided view? Because if they taught a broader, a range of issues there, they wouldn't see Mandela as a hero. Far from it. Now, the same goes for Martin Luther King Jr. in my view. He was no saint. Now, this idea of one day people are going to be viewed by the content of their character. I don't think it was ever not thus. Could he find people that didn't give a fuck about character and only saw skin color? No, I don't doubt that. But for me, certainly since I remember, and everyone I know, the issue has always been behaviour, not skin color. Now, Martin Luther King was asserting, I don't think he assumed it for a moment, was asserting that skin color was the only issue. There was no, if skin color was it. And the content of the character, meaning behaviour, should be but I think it was always thus. Can you find people that would see a skin color? Sure. But I think the vast majority of people would see it as only behaviour. I don't think skin color was ever an issue. So by pointing out, again, the straw man thing, that all white people only viewed black people by skin color, was simply nonsense. And I don't believe it. He believed it even at the time. And but these sort of wider issues aren't discussed. But on the flip side, white people are maliciously maligned. All characters throughout history, every tiny flaw, anyone that can't be written off as evil and fascist and so on, they then say the person was gay or lesbian, and therefore they have some sort of virtue from that. Now, this very one-sided depiction of history, you'd have to be an activist to begin with. The teachers either know better or themselves are so stupid that they don't know and don't bother to read. Now, I remember, teachers, certainly when I was at school, I don't remember them being political. I mean, I can look back sort of now or later, I look back and thought, well, that person was obviously sympathetic to the left, but they didn't push that view. That wasn't something that they went around the classroom pushing. I remember bumping into a teacher some years after leaving school, and this is high school I'm talking about now. They started talking about socialism, and they were off the planet socialist. They were fucking left of the left, but you wouldn't know it from the way they taught in high school. Now, looking at propaganda in schools generally, going back to, say, the Soviet era, and you see the communist touch that you see today in the West. So say in 1930s, a propaganda education poster in the Soviet Union, they would have 5 people in the shot on the poster. It wasn't a photograph, it was like a painting or a poster. And it would be the female teacher, fairly youngish children, probably under the age of 10, I guess, from the looks of it. And there'd be 4 girls and 1 boy. The teacher's female, so there's only 1 male in the poster, and one of the girls is Asian. So now, and another looks rather brown, so suggesting, possibly the Caucasus Mountains, somewhere around there, close towards the border with Turkey. So now, if you look at the Chinese education posters during the time of say, the Cultural Revolution, so late 1950s, that time, early 1960s, again, you see the same thing. Female teacher, youngish children, 9, 10 years old, that sort of thing. And again, 3 girls, 1 boy. So in each case, like you look at all the education posters from the Soviet or the communist type countries, they all have a heavy overrepresentation of women or young girls, in the case of the 10-year-olds, the female teacher, the young, were always overrepresented. Now, I wonder why that is, because that's the same you see today. Like you look at an education photograph or poster in say, from Sydney, for example. There'd be 5 people in it, the female teacher looking very lesbian, and maybe one boy. You're lucky if there's even one white boy in there. So clearly that to me illustrates immediately that education is something that's perceived as a propaganda conduit. So this is how you get children, and you fill them full of propaganda. Now you'd say, well, all these kids are getting their heads filled with the most outrageous propaganda, and they are. And every subject now has its climate change angle, or its lesbian angle, or its trans angle. Everything is propaganda. There is not 1 second of the day that is not given over to how can we introduce propaganda into this subject, whether it's mathematics or chemistry or physics or anything at all. And that's certainly how it is. Even in the wealthier private schools, not as pronounced in the wealthier private schools, and merit still plays a much bigger role in the private schools, but it's still there. That propaganda is still there, and it seems like they've sort of been forced into it. If you don't do this, we'll accuse you of being Nazis or something. It seems to be that there's something quite defensive about how it's done in the wealthier private schools. It's sort of being done as a defense mechanism rather than this is what we want to do. So the propaganda, though, is very single-minded. It's directed in one. It's put in one direction only, and they've removed, airbrushed out anything that would be negative to or may restrict or limit the reach and effect of this propaganda. And let's call it what it is. They're just telling a lot of lies, like the mainstream globalist controlled media. They just tell lies nonstop. And that's really what the education has become. Lies after lies after lies, just and one on top of the other. Now, you may say, well, gee whiz, that's a real problem. We've got these indoctrinated, brainwashed kids coming through, and we do, and they're going to all become leftist ideological fanatics and activists, which many of them will, and they're going to go work in diversity inclusion departments, the public service and human resource departments, and they're going to have influence out of all proportion to their numbers, and their ideological fanaticism will have very negative effects on the whole economy, which it will. Affirmative action and hiring quotas being among them. But take some heart in this, that after 70 years of communism, where all this stuff was forced on them, the great murderer of history, Joseph Stalin, used to go to women's rights conference congratulating women on the social progress they'd made, whilst signing hundreds of death warrants a day for people who'd been arbitrarily arrested and were being arbitrarily murdered. And this was the murderous fucking dictator of history. And here he is going to women's rights conferences and standing there with black union activists from the United States and this sort of. But after 70 years of communism, where nearly the entire population had been indoctrinated from the minute they wake up to the minute they go to sleep every fucking day, everything's propaganda, everything is lies, and everything is coercion. And once after 70 years of that, as soon as communism fell over, 2 out of every 3 people immediately disowned anything to do with communism. And if you look at Eastern Europe now, that was communist for 45, 50 years, they couldn't wait to get out of it, and are very suspicious of any authoritarian regimes, socialist regimes that purport to know what's best for the people. So again, the majority of the population knew nothing but communism, but they couldn't get away from it quick enough when the opportunity came along. So I think that whereas we see indoctrinated children and young people everywhere, and they're certainly around, I don't know how many would cling to those obviously ridiculous views if they had to face some sort of reality. The Russians certainly didn't. The Soviets, didn't. I mean, the Soviet Union went from being the so-called equal equal socialist paradise where everyone's equal. It went from that to being a rigid patriarchy within days of communism falling over. That's how quick it was. So I think something similar will happen in the West. As soon as the globalists lose their complete power over pretty much all information and propaganda, I think we'll see the same sort of thing. It'll all fall apart. You've been Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.